So, hello, everybody. My name is Marcus Frutiger, and I'm a professor at the UCL Institute of Ophthalmology. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Dawn Sim. So you see, my claim to fame here is actually I knew Dawn before she became famous. So at the time, she was a chief resident at Moorfields Eye Hospital, and she decided she wanted to do a PhD in my lab. And already then it was clear that she will make an impact in her field. And after completing her PhD, it did actually not take her long to become a consultant at Moorfields and to establish herself as a leader in retinal imaging and teleophthalmology. Her influence and leadership is actually nicely illustrated by the fact that she has been voted for 3 consecutive years since 2017 onto the ophthalmologist power list of the top 100 ophthalmologists globally. So without further ado, I'm gonna hand over to Dawn to present her talk.
Thank you, Marcus. I think what other people don't know is the only reason I chose to do a PhD is because I met Marcus, and I definitely did not tell him that during my PhD. Um,
Yeah.
I think Marcus is a great educator, and that's the reason I'm dabbling and just starting my journey into education is because I think Marcus, the question you always ask me is which amino acids have 3 covalent bonds and which amino acids have 2 covalent bonds. And to this day, I cannot remember if it's AT or COG. And every time I give you an answer, it's always wrong. So
Yeah,
I'm not
it's
going to
nucleic acids either way.
nucleic. Oh yes, nucleic acids. I swear, they did give me my PhD finally. But I'm going to share my screen and thank you everyone for spending the evening with us. And today I'm going to talk about the birth of digital ophthalmology. But before that, and I can see some familiar faces there, so thank you for joining us. I'm just going to minimize you so I can see my screen. So these are my current roles. I've been a consultant about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, one of them. And I'm a consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields with an interest in medical retina and cataract, but also the director for telemedicine there. And I also work with UCL on a few educational courses. As you know, Marcus does the bioscience and entrepreneurship course, which is excellent. And I do lecture on that as well. But we're embarking on a new journey, setting up telemedicine courses, and as well as those in a realm of digital health and in AI, as well as coding and all the clever things that people in artificial intelligence research do. But I'm going to talk a little bit about digital ophthalmology and clarify a few statements on that. And I really want to encourage everyone to type in your questions in a chat box. We have a whole hour here, and my talk hopefully will not take too long, maybe an hour, half an hour at maximum. So without further ado, these are my disclosures. I think it's always very good to start with the problem. So this is a stock image taken, but I think in healthcare, there is no eye clinic in the world that I know of that doesn't have a packed waiting room. And in these days of social distancing, this has become a really apparent problem. And how do we solve this problem? When we talk about digital, it becomes such a huge word, and what does it really mean? So I looked up what digital means, and really in first century BC was when the term digitus, was coined, and it means a toe or finger, so your digit. And by the late 14th century, a digit was understood to be any number below 10, so 1 to 9. And then in the computer generation in the 1940s and 50s, digits became something that was one not, one not, one not. And those of us that are old enough to remember the film Daryl and all the other old kind of big box computers, 1010 was something that is familiar to us. But today, digital has become something that is tactile again and implies something that you touch and an interaction you can have with your finger. So a lot of people say this has come full circle. So digital, I think, to me, when I think of the word, I think of technology, automation. There is hardware and software involved. In the realm of eye care, for me, digital means telemedicine, how it enables us to monitor patients at home, smartphones, smartwatches, smart everything. And of course, artificial intelligence, which is very, very topical, but was covered in a different webinar. So I'll just touch on it today and not go into detail. A lot of people think digital hospitals, digital innovation. This is the view you get. And this is actually a photo of Marcus when I first met him. And I'm sure Marcus is chuckling. I hope so. This kind of webinars is difficult. But this is what we think of when we think of digital. And it's quite a leap because I think just today I was picking up a pen and writing on a piece of paper. So we have a way to go. So when we think about digital and improving things, we think of digital innovation. And what is innovation? And at this time, I would like to encourage everybody, and I hope that if you are interested in this webinar, that you will be able to scan this QR code. If you have an iPhone, actually, you just have to turn on your camera and it does it automatically. If you have a different smartphone, I don't know how you do it, unfortunately. But I will leave this QR code in the corner of my screen um, for the next couple of slides. And I'd like you to answer this question: which types of innovations, and I have four choices, do you think are the most relevant and the most achievable in healthcare? And the types of innovation that I've focused on here are: one, incremental, which you see in blue on the left, small continuous improvement to existing products, services, and processes. Two, outcome driven, where the customers trying to get done, what the job uh, is used as an input to the innovation process. I know it sounds a little bit confusing, but if you think outcome driven, you think endpoint that drives the innovation. The other one is disruptive, which is, I think, what we've mostly heard about. So something that displaces an established way of doing things and creates a whole new way. So, and process innovation, implementation of a new and significantly improved production or delivery method. So with these four, which do you think are the most relevant and achievable in healthcare? And through the time of my talk, you can enter it several times if you want, and this is just getting a sense of what everyone thinks. So what does the World Health Organization say about digital interventions in healthcare systems? So they published this in 2018, actually, and it's the most up-to-date guideline on digital interventions. And what they do, I think this is something worth reading if you're interested in the space, because they talk about what's important and what's not important. And I think something to highlight on the WHO guideline is they talk about costs. So if you have £10 to spend on healthcare, if you spend all £10 on digital interventions, it takes away £10 from a flu jab. Maybe you pay for 5 flu jabs. I'm sure it costs more than that. But would giving 5 flu jabs be more important than buying that new smartphone for your hospital? So really that dumbs it down. And I think it was very good of them to state that in the guidelines. But what they did really well as well was to define terms. Definitions are very important in this space, and as well as changing definitions. So e-health is something that we know about. The word digital health comes rooted in e-health, and that's defined as the use of information and communications technology in support of health-related fields. M-Health is a subset of e-health, and it focuses on using mobile wireless devices. The term digital health has been thrown around a lot, of late, and now it's become a very broad umbrella term that encompasses things like AI, genomics, big data, etc. So when reading in this space, you must understand e-health and digital health has a very broad umbrella. What does that mean for us? I think all these things, there's so much terminology. I will come down to specifics on ophthalmology, but I just wanted to plug in just an editorial that I wrote fairly recently with a couple of my colleagues from around the world. And it talks about the Internet of Things. And now that's another buzzword that is important in this space. What does that mean? The Internet of Things is really about connectivity and automation. It's about making things smart. So we talk about smartphone, smartwatch, smart coffee cup, My coffee cup is not smart because it doesn't know how many cups of coffee I drank. If it says, Dawn, you've drunk, you have too much caffeine today, you are wired and you will not be able to sleep tonight, then that is a smart coffee machine. So what about in healthcare? So some examples are continuous glucose monitors that we know have been in the market for some time now. But if they're connected to your insulin pen, that's smart. If it's connected to your phone, it's smart. It helps automate the reading and helps you regulate your insulin intake. Closed loop automated insulin delivery systems are a further step away from that. Smart inhalers for asthma have shown that compliance is much increased in that field. Connected contact lenses, as you see on the bottom right again, that's something that can measure your blood glucose, can monitor your eye pressure, etc., etc., and even smartwatch apps that can monitor depression and monitor mood. So these are just some examples of connected devices. What does that mean for eye care? So I'd just like to talk about what I hope for digital health in the future. So Emma Williams, let's say Emma Williams is me. I was born in Los Angeles. I was slightly myopic, so I was seeing an optometrist for my glasses from age of 6. I decided to move to London because my parents got a nice big banking job there. And I did university there, but I developed diabetes type 1 in that time, and I needed to have diabetic eye screening. So in the UK, as you know, everyone with a diagnosis of diabetes above of age 12 has an annual photo of their eye taken. So I'm in the diabetic eye screening program. I'm 25. They have the information from my optometrist in Los Angeles. I get a very high-flying banking job and I decide to move to Asia. So I'm going to Singapore. And because of my diabetes, I've developed an early cataract, but the ophthalmologist there has all the information from my eye from the rest of the world, and information is shared. So as you know, that doesn't occur right now. And that really talks about telemedicine and connectivity, patient portals, and information sharing. So in this field of digital transformation of healthcare at Moorfields, about 2-3 years ago, the digital clinical laboratory was developed, and our executive team, in collaboration with UCL, had the foresight to create this digital laboratory where I reside as director for telemedicine. And our vision was to become a world leader in digitally enabled eye care, and mission was to create a people-powered, knowledge-powered health system by applying digital technology to the patient healthcare experience. So all very nice words, and I'll come to details later. It's easy to have a big mission statement, but I wanted to introduce some of my colleagues. So here you see Peter Thomas, smack in the center, Director of Digital Innovation. So he's a pediatric ophthalmologist by trade, but he used to work for IBM and currently does a lot of work in video consultations, as well as home vision testing for children, as well as facial recognition software for measurements of eyelids. And he is actually one of the module leads for the telemedicine course in digital health. Here you see Consultation Velasquez. He's the head of our reading center that mans a lot of clinical trials as well as our virtual clinics. And Piers Keane, who gave a webinar about myself, leads a lot of our AI work. We also have Nora Colton, who's the director for education for UCL and Moorfield. So within this team, those are our missions and goals. And in summary, we feel that the future of eye care will be driven by the imperative to provide more care because of an aging population, a population that has more diabetes, etc., with fewer resources. And to do that at the same or higher quality will require something different. So technological innovation into redesign of care pathways will be essential for these goals. And this agenda was embraced by our board really to appoint clinicians to lead digital innovation, teleophthalmology, and care design. And I'm going to give some examples after this. So very overarching statement. Let's not forget our problem. And this is our problem. We're trying to solve this. So take a little interlude. I've been talking for 15 minutes now. People must be getting bored. So I tested this slide out on my nanny, who is at least a decade younger than me, just to say, what do you think this is? Do you recognize this at all? So Busted was a band that released the single Year 3000 in 2002. And they talked about the future. It's a funny band. So this was covered by the Jonas Brothers, I think in 2006 or something like that. Have a little listen. It's a catchy tune. Very, people make fun of me for liking this song, but I think it's just to highlight what happened in my training. So I started training in and around the year 2000. And when I was training, this was all we had. We had photography of the fundus. We were no longer using slides. We had moved from film, so we had digital images. Smartphones were not as they were now, but there was some smartphones, but we still had Snake. There's still buttons with numbers on the phones. But really after year 2000, things progressed so rapidly. First with the OCT of sufficient resolution to see all 10 layers of the retina. We had wide field imaging of the retina where we could see 80 to 90% of the entire fundus. Below two images are OCT angiograms. And OCT angiograms, when I first encountered them, was after I finished my PhD. So we had the 3x3, as you see in the bottom right, and the 6x6 square. But now we have 12x12 and even wider field OCT angiography. So OCT angiography is basically non-contrast based angiography. You don't have to inject the patient with anything. It uses OCT technology to look at movement of blood cells in blood vessels to delineate them for better viewing. And you see on the bottom left OCT angiogram areas of blood vessels in the red triangle, new aberrant blood vessels in diabetic retinopathy, and areas where there are no blood vessels, which is really important. So the change and evolution in imaging has really disrupted the space, I would say. So new therapies as well. Many of you in the field will know of intravitreal injections for age-related macular degeneration as well as diabetic retinopathy. This is Roche's new port delivery system that enables a patient to have a port that is filled with a drug, and they don't have to have a refill for 6 months. So rather than come every month or every 2 months for treatment, they can come once every 6 months. And there is good phase 3 data on this. There is also a new drug from Novartis, Bevu, which allows 4 monthly injections, an improvement from the previous 3 monthly at the longest interval before. And I think capacity within hospitals has been highlighted by our recent COVID-19 crisis. With the pandemic, as most of us will know, a lot of hospitals shut down non-emergency care for four months or so. And this has really highlighted the problem of getting patients appointments. So this is an article I wrote with the Digital Clinical Lab, two of the clinical leads there, Peter Thomas and Chris Canning, in March this year. And we talked about how can we, with the pandemic, keep our workers safe as well as our patients safe. And in that, we talked about scrutiny and risk stratification of who needs to come to hospital. I think Moorfields, along with many hospitals around the world, saw the largest scale risk stratification and scrutiny exercise we'd ever seen before. We went through thousands of patients, and they were either deemed high, medium, or low risk. And in the right field, you see all these color codes. It's not for you to read, but they represent different departments such as glaucoma, medical retina, adnexal, oncology, general ophthalmology, genetics, going on and on. And every department had its guidelines and had to risk stratify patients that could not come to clinic because of the COVID pandemic. And what we found in our intravitreal injection clinics that you see in the green bars, and about a third to half of our patients were high risk, and then medium and low risk for the rest. And these patients in the high risk category were statistically significantly older than those that were in the low risk categories, so by a decade. So these patients had to come in. A lot of them couldn't come in. What do you do? So when we were looking at these patients in the time of lockdown and deciding who needed to come in and who didn't need to come in, what we did was something called forward triage. It's a very recognized strategy for managing healthcare surges, sorting patients on the basis of need. And the key to successful implementation of this is good risk stratification based on a clear required minimum data set. And in ophthalmology, these things are obvious: vision, um, eye pressure measurements, old photographs. But how can we improve on this rather than looking at old images, old information? How can we gather better data from our patients? So in digital health, I think the innovation here is in the way we information gather to inform risk stratification using the strategies below. So telemedicine, self-care, and artificial intelligence. And the examples of which I'm going to talk about now. So asynchronous telemedicine occurs when information is gathered in one place and time, and in a different place and time, an expert reads it and is done in a more efficient manner than if you had to see the expert one-to-one, face-to-face. And this is two of our staff at Morpheus Croydon, where I work, and they were one of the first that started to scale our virtual clinics, where patients came in, had a history taken, eye pressure taken, image taken, and went home and had a report done by a specialist at a later time. So that's one example. And when we instituted and scaled these virtual clinics, what we found was we looked at our first in and around almost 2,000 patients that we saw in the first year. We found that we didn't do so well because 30% of them had to come back to a face-to-face clinic. And when we took better images and trained the staff, we reduced this to 15% a year later, and now it's less than 5% because this is several years ago now. The main reason for this was the training of our staff, where we took better images and we took better information from the patients. And worsening of monitored disease became the primary reason in which patients came back for a face-to-face appointment. And that's the whole point of these diagnostic clinics or virtual clinics. So that's one example. We improved the way we gathered information from patients as well with the smart clinical history. So this is something that was designed collaboratively with a telemedicine company called Big Picture Eye Health. The smart clinical history is just something that allows somebody who is not used to taking a clinical history to ask the right question. So if you said, how are you feeling since the last clinic? Are you better, same, or worse? If you're worse, it takes you down a different line of questioning. If you're better, it takes you an alternative line of questioning. So if you're worse, is there vision loss? Is it for near, distant? Is it slow, quick? How bad is it? Is there pain in your eye, etc., etc.? So you kind of understand that it's a logic process. What we did was we also gathered all the data in a structured format that was coded in a SNOMED code, and we had all the images in a single platform for viewing. And this is really the ideal setting for asynchronous telemedicine. What we found was we did patient journey measurements where we tagged patients so we could tell if they were standing up, sitting down, waiting, where they were, and found that the journey time for each patient for these virtual clinics was less than half of what was the current face-to-face pathway. There was less waiting around. Patients were waiting for less than an hour routinely in our virtual clinics. What we also did was we linked with optometry practices in the community. So this is David, who works locally at a practice near Moorfields, and him and 9 other practices in his small chain are connected to us via a cloud-based platform where they can send us a full volume of CT scans as well as a smart clinical history for an opinion. So what we found in the first 100 patients that came through that pathway was that more than half did not actually have to come into hospital for management. And those that required to come into hospital urgently were seen more quickly as a result of this cloud-based telemedicine service. So that's a whistle-stop tour on telemedicine, asynchronous telemedicine. And what really I think the learning points here is that it links us to the community and it allows more patients with treatable disease to be seen in hospital, and just makes the communication between community and eye hospital much more seamless than with paper or with routine methods of referral. So that's an area that I was quite active in research over the past few years. Synchronous telemedicine is something that's newer, I think, to eye health and newer to much of medicine. And I think it's important to touch on this. So this is Peter Thomas, you see here, the only man in the picture in the middle, so our Director for Digital Innovation, and he really spearheaded video consultations for Moorfields. Sarah Canning is our head of optometry, sat in the middle there with me. And on the right, you see Pei Lin. She's a consultant ophthalmologist in accident emergency eye care at Moorfields. And there she's doing a telemedicine consult with a friend. And if you come to the Morpheus website, you will see that patients will be able to access video consultations, and it gives step-by-step instructions on how to obtain an appointment. And there is also a virtual receptionist that will be able to guide you. And in your view, in my view, sorry, I have waiting rooms, just as you do, as you see that crowded waiting room. So here I would be able to see how many patients are waiting to see me, how long they've been waiting, who's being seen. So if you have a team, and what I think we were most successful with virtual eye consultations was in our eye casualty. So at Morpheus Eye Casualty in the main branch at City Road, we see between 250 to 300 patients per day. In COVID, this reduced to about 60 per day, but the video consultations was very quickly taken up, and more than 300 patients were seen within the first 2 weeks of implementation. And to date, we have more than 10,000 consults, of which only 1 in 5 video consultations require a face-to-face appointment. So I think this has been a huge success led by my colleague, Peter Thomas. This is me humbly doing a video consultation. You can invite a guest as well. So if a family member is shielding and you want to invite another family member, you can invite them via the platform. And this one we use Attend Anywhere that was provided by NHS England to all primary secondary care trusts around the country during the COVID period. If you need an interpreter, that's something that you can. If there's a multidisciplinary team meeting for a patient, this is something that can be done as well. And what we used it for was actually to train patients how to test their eyesight at home using their smartphone. So this is something that the patient will see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as they swipe through their smartphone. We help them install the application and explain to them that when they test their eye, there'll be a traffic light system, green, amber, red, for how they did that day. And if they had red signals, we would ring them. So I'd like to take a little interlude. I'm coming towards the end now to talk about what the World Health Organization says about self-care. So self-care, home monitoring is a big buzzword at the moment, and they define it as the ability of individuals, families, and community to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, etc., with or without the support of a health care provider. And the details of which I think are important. I think what's relevant to what we've done at Moorfields is we've used it to optimize treatment. We've used it to empower individuals as self-carers. So let me give you an example. In eye care, I think home monitoring, I have a bias for medical retinal disease because that's my specialty. We give out the Amsler grid. We say, okay, take this piece of paper home with you, cover one eye, look at the dot. If there are any wavy lines, let us know. And then patients come back with things like, oh, I can see a black spot there, and I've got wavy lines there. The problem with this is it's not objective. You can't measure it. You can't put it in the electronic medical record in a meaningful way, and you can't really use it for risk stratification whether the patient is better or worse. So how about monitoring macular hyperacuity and distortion at home? So this is a randomized controlled trial of a home monitoring system for early detection of conversion from dry to wet AMD called the HOME study, such a good name. And this was part of a very big study called the AREDS2 study that looked at different vitamins and compounds to delay or prevent conversion from dry to wet AMD. And what they found was using the device you see on the right there, that there was a smaller loss of visual acuity in the device arm compared to no device, so standard of care. And the safety committee actually terminated the study early as a result of which. So we do know it works. There's good high-level evidence for it. But what about using your smartphone? So in collaboration with a company called Oculocare Limited, we use an app called All Eye. where it asked you to align dots. So if you use your smartphone and the arrows as you see there to move the dot up and down to form what you think would be a straight line, it would test hyperacuity in 12 degrees of field in your macula. So in the time during lockdown from 4 months, we onboarded about 250 patients and about 5,000 home tests were performed. In that time, 26 patients generated persistent alarms. So they were not coming in. They were patients that had their appointment deferred because they were deemed medium to low risk. These are the diagnoses of the patients. As you see, it's quite a mixed bag with a preponderance of diabetic macular edema. Of the 13 patients who felt their vision had worsened with persistent alarm and were willing to attend hospital in the time of lockdown, 13 of them, 9 received intravitreal injections sooner than they would have if they were not monitored at home. And this is just ending with a case example. This a lady who very kindly allowed us to share her story. This is actually her smartphone. So she had bilateral diabetic macular edema. She was receiving bilateral injections for it. And she was self-confessed to be bad with technology. So with the aid of Morpheus Eye Charity, we had iPod touches that we were able to loan to patients. And she became one of our champion users, testing her vision almost every day. So the yellow arrow here shows you when lockdown occurred. And on the left of that was prior to lockdown. You see there is variation, but she had some green dots, some amber dots, and a few red dots here and there, but nothing persistent. But post-lockdown, she started to generate persistent alarms, and we gave her, spoke to her on the telephone. She had telephone consultation, and she felt her vision was fine and was not keen to come to hospital at that time. I think it was April time. So April was quite a bad time in the UK, in London for COVID. So we said, okay, we'll give you another call in 6 weeks' time. And in 6 weeks, she felt her vision had significantly worsened and she consistently, again, was generating persistent alarms and she wanted to come into hospital. So this was when we saw her in June. As you can see in January, she was relatively dry. There was good foveal contour in both eyes. But by June, she had bilateral macular edema that recurred and we gave her injections on the day that she attended. Fortunately, she did tests the day after she had her injections, and you can see her score started to climb up, and they've been maintaining since, and she's been attending since. So it's just one of the nice stories that we have that we like to share, and there's more data to come. I've started putting the QR code again, and I hope that people will scan it and answer some questions so I can see what people think. But I'll reiterate what the question is soon. I think I'm just going to end here with the didactic lecture. I think I want everyone to look at this picture. I wish my kid drew it, but it was not drawn by my kid. But it was drawn by a 7-year-old depicting her idea of a visit to a doctor that she's had. So I always ask people to say, do you know who the doctor is in this picture? So the doctor is, the chap with the very skinny legs that's typing on his computer. And I think digital health, electronic medical records has removed that face-to-face doctor-patient relationship that we have. I hope digital health actually removes this, that automates most of that, and allows us to speak to patients, make eye contact, and have a better engagement with them in the future. And I think this definitely is imprinted in my memory of what not to do in a consultation. And I'm as guilty as any in doing that. So this was the question I asked. Which types of innovation do you think are most relevant and achievable in healthcare? And let's see what everyone said. So I'm going to come out of my slides now and see if people actually answered. Let's see. Oh no, maybe it was just me. No, 12 people managed. Oh, let's see. Okay, there's been a real spread. So disruptive innovation, pretty much spread out. Process innovation, most people think that's pretty achievable and relevant. Outcome, again, to the top right-hand corner. And incremental. Disruptive, I think, is the most spread out. I'll tell you a little bit about what I think. I mean, that might not be the right thing. I think it's important to understand that all innovation has a role in healthcare, but the one that most people are talking about in healthcare is actually incremental innovation. And in my experience, to make change in healthcare is different from making change in other fields, because safety is of utmost importance. Safety in patient information as well as the care we give. There's also the old adage of change management. And I think if you are a surgeon, you completely understand that if there's a way that you know is safe and you do it extremely well, that's something you stick to. So change is a difficult thing in healthcare. So incremental innovation, I find, has been the most successful in my limited experience. Disruptive innovation tends to be something that happens to us. So we tend to be the passive recipients of disruptive innovation rather than active proponents of disruptive innovation. Outcome and process innovation, I think, is something that's important to think about, because it's very relevant to healthcare in that the results. So audit is something that's important that we do, that should drive how we practice. Process innovation is important, but it needs much more of a systems approach, which is out of scope of this talk. Okay, thank you very much. And Marcus, I'm going to hand the floor back to you.
Okay, I muted myself successfully. So if there's any questions, you can either type them in the chat, or you just unmute yourself maybe and ask if there's not too many people asking questions. In the first instance, Don, with this COVID-19 impact, it's kind of forced most of us to adopt digital approaches to all kinds of things much more quickly than any of us would have thought is possible. So in a way, in particular in your field, how much do you think is this whole thing kind of a blessing in disguise, and how much is there to stay? So these changes which have been forced upon you because of all the social distancing, how much of that do you think will stay, and how much of an impact will it have on your line of work with the digital telemedicine approaches?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, Marcus, because if you look back at the WHO guidelines to digital transformation, really, a lot of digital innovation and change is very short-lived, and there is no lasting effects. And with COVID, I always liken it to an intervention that would never been approved by the Drugs and Therapeutics Committee in any department in the world. If you write a research application to say, okay, I'm going to just cancel clinics for 4 months and I'm going to see who goes blind, like nobody is going to approve that study. But unfortunately, it occurred to us. And unfortunately, as healthcare workers, we tend to just be responsive to that. And an error would be to respond with short-lived measures, which I think, as with most things, 80 to 90% will be. The 10 to 20% that will have longevity is an important time for us to identify those and to sponsor those and push those forwards. In ophthalmology, I think what has happened is, I think synchronous telemedicine had its time and will stay in a small part. So for example, video consultations for A&E, video consultations for pediatrics and adnexal eyelids has been very successful, and that will stay. But in places like medical retinal disease, glaucoma, there will not be a big role for it, because we are very reliant on measurements like eye pressure, scans, etc. The other thing that's been pushed forwards is self-care and home monitoring, and empowering the patient to test themselves in one way or the other, be it access an optometrist or access something on their smartphone that allows them to do a test. So I had one of my consultants talk to me. He rang a patient. The patient said, my vision's 360. And he said, how do you know? He said, well, You guys posted me an A4 sheet of paper, a blue tack, and a 2-meter piece of string. So I stuck it on my wall and tested my eye according to the instructions. So it's, I think that is innovative. It's not quite digital. It's a piece of paper and a piece of blue tack, but that really made a difference. So I mean, that was a very long, broad answer to your question, Marcus.
Okay. Thank you. There is actually, so Maeve logged in the chat. She says 1 out of 5 need seeing face-to-face out of A&E. Can you give us diagnosis managed via telemedicine? Which ones need seen?
Hi, Maeve. Great to see you. Great to see your face. I miss the old days.
I know, I miss the old days too. It's lovely to see. Dawn was the best colleague, just to say. Thank you. Your talk was great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You're looking well.
Yes, thank you very much. Living the dream, you know how it is.
So the A&E lot have actually published their work in Eye. If you Google like video eye casualty, Eye journal, you'll find it. It's mainly the conjunctivitis, dry eye, blah blah, that was seen in Croydon, where we did a subset of the video consultations and the triage. It was much less. So only 6% in the COVID period required face-to-face appointment. The COVID period is very different from routine. There will be a change. And we had much more serious diseases in Croydon because we do a phone triage prior to the video triage. So it's very heavily triaged. And we actually have a community arm that triages prior to coming in. The Morpheus eye casualty is a walk-in service, so anybody can come in. So it was mainly the anterior eye problems that was seen, 4 out of 5. And the posterior eye problems had to come in. Yeah.
Okay, grand. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. David, sorry to put you on the spot. David Barker, I can see you. So David, I'm going to let you slowly unmute your mic. But
hello, you're right.
Yeah. So David and I have known each other for what, 5 years now? Yeah.
Something like that, probably, yeah, about 5 years.
So David is an optometrist that works in the community at Croydon, but also does a lot of ophthalmology care there, and has been integral to the telemedicine work we've done with community optometrists in your area. Would you like to share a little bit about how you found the whole process? And you can be honest, as we're all friends.
Yeah, it was very interesting actually. It was a good insight into the world of digital starting. I mean, we started it a long time ago, as you say, with a small number of patients. We found it particularly in our practices quite good for newly qualified or new to OCT optometrists who weren't really very sure on what's going on in cases. So rather than having to refer into practices, then they were getting some extra reassurance. I think if you've got more OCT experience, you tend to need that less. It's just, particularly the newly qualified and the new OCT is quite, new to a lot of optometrists. And although, some have been using it for quite a long time, there's still quite a few that are suddenly getting OCTs given to them and don't know what to do with them. That's the big problem when you get a lot of referrals coming in. So certainly integrating a big picture to our practice was very good from that point of view. The casualty side was quite interesting because we were getting a lot of eye casualty patients coming in from Croydon, as you said, and certainly you can do some by telly, but there's a limit to what you can do with a telephone sometimes and video. Yeah.
So David and I have done this referral refinement piece of work for a long time, and David's being very, very modest because he's like a super OCT expert reader, and most people are not quite there. It's tough. I think when you don't see a high volume of pathology, it's really tough.
I think in Croydon we're lucky because we do see a lot of pathology. I think if you're working in a practice where most people are normal and then you get something that's abnormal, then you tend to panic. Whereas I think because we do a lot of triage in Croydon, we're seeing a higher volume of abnormals already. So then you tend to panic less.
Yeah.
There's actually a question in the chat relating to that, asking, the involvement of the optometrist community. And the question is it's a natural involvement. However, concerns have always been around access to electronic patient record systems. Has this been overcome?
The short answer is no.
No. No.
Short answer is no. And the problem is not with telemedicine platforms, it's with EMRs. So interoperability is a key word here. And the word API. APIs are basically passports for one piece of software to talk to another piece of software in a structured manner. So for example, if your telemedicine platform has visual acuity, IOP, and central macular thickness, it needs to talk to the EMR and feed that information in a structured manner. An API allows that. And most EMRs and most telemedicine platforms can do that. But I think the EMR platforms are still very reticent to allow that interoperability. We're slowly pushing for it. And if you look at the field of radiology, for example, there used to be 10 different X-ray machines, none of which work with each other. Now they all work together, they have a common language. So I think we're moving towards that place in ophthalmology, but we're still away from there.
In terms, I was actually doing a talk. I was wondering, you talk about the asynchronous aspect of this. Is optometrists your kind of main avenue where you think there is room for expansion, where you want to develop this, or is there any other areas where you think you could build this up?
So that's our hope, because I think for the UK, England particularly, there's already established optometry practices that have good relationships with the community. And now that they have these machines, it'd be a waste not to utilize that resource, that hardware, the personnel resource. And it just requires a good connectivity between hospital and community in a push and pull fashion, not just them giving information to us, which I think is what everyone is focused on. I'm very, very, very slightly upset by that, because they have to access the information from us too. That's for true collaborative care. There has to be bi-directional flow of information, which does not exist at the moment.
Okay, there's another question here by Debbie. It says, hi Dawn, as an imaging technician in a small DGH, we have found undertaking virtual clinics straightforward and efficient. The issues have been the clinicians struggling to find time to review tests.
Oh, that's a very good question. So, it's not a problem we have in my service for the moment. Yes, it's always difficult to find time. When you give clinicians a virtual clinic, they must have a session to do it. It is not something you do in your free time. It takes time to review scans. But what you can do more efficiently is collect sufficient information for the clinician to make the right decision. So for example, in a virtual clinic or in David's practice, where he sees an OCT, he thinks it's wet, he knows it's probably wet, but he wants to ask me for another opinion. He collects the information such as sudden deterioration of vision, yes, distortion, left eye, yes, all these risk factors. So when I look at the scan, it takes me 1 minute to say, I agree with you, this is right, because the right information was collected. In our virtual clinics, we do it in quite an old-fashioned way. We don't have the smart clinical history applied as yet, but we require technicians to ask a minimum set of questions for us to make that decision, to make it more efficient as well. I think there was another question, Marcus, about telemedicine course. As a junior doctor, would it be within my scope? I think very much it was designed for junior doctors, optometrists, people with already a little basic knowledge of ophthalmology or eye disease or medicine. And what you will learn in telemedicine course is actually, it is not just designed by me, it's done by a team of about 8 other doctors with a special interest in digital health and telemedicine. And it goes through in a lot of detail aspects of it that I never thought to think about. So for example, how you set up a service, really putting that in structure, the history of which one of my very good fellows, Siegfried Wagner, who's a big AI research guy, has put together so nicely. So I think it's interesting in that way. But we also go through OCT and OCT imaging in detail, which I think would be useful for somebody who's, so David, I don't think the OCT stuff would be useful for you, but be useful for your junior optometrist. That's for example. So if David wanted to take an OCT course, you definitely want to take a more advanced OCT course, because this is the basics, as well as going into a lot of detail on common diseases that you would see in the primary care.
Okay, Another question, how far are we away from the eye care passport for life?
So technologically, we could have done it yesterday. I think it's a bigger, the barriers are more political and costs and health economics related. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. There's another question. Can you see it, Don, in the chat?
Yeah, it says, would AI assist in predicting a diagnosis based on a set of questions to the patients, similar to many symptom checkers that are out there online, and have we done any work in this field? Oh, so it's something I'm very interested in, symptom checkers. So there's a lot of patient portals. Unfortunately, like many other applications, healthcare-based applications, it doesn't connect to anything. It doesn't connect to the EMR. So in isolation, it's very weak. I think AI research is based on the structured data that you have and the diversity of the data, the size of the data, the quality of the data. If you had symptom checkers linked to an EMR, linked to images, you would be able to do AI research to develop an algorithm where the symptom checkers can predict to a certain level of accuracy the diagnosis. But because that data set doesn't exist, it's very hard to do that research. So a lot of the work that we're doing at Moorfields is really curating and prospectively curating and collecting data in that structured fashion that would inform this. But in the first instance, we need to set up infrastructure that would be able to collect data for these symptom checkers, and then set up infrastructure to connect that to the rest of the patient's data.
Yeah. Because AI is all about data sets, isn't it?
I think so. So the only really useful thing that AI has been applied to, I think, in the UK, interestingly, which I didn't present today because I didn't think there was enough time, is a piece of work by UCLH in an algorithm using machine learning, not deep learning, in predicting do not attends. So they used an algorithm to predict to a very high level of accuracy of patients who wouldn't come. So in this algorithm, they halved the number of patients that needed reminder phone calls. So for the moment, if you had reminder phone calls, you called everybody. But this half the number you need to call, and the amount of money saved for that in terms of the attendance plus the manpower required to make a phone call is huge. They calculated it to be £1 billion annually, which I can believe, because do not attend rates are a huge, problem around the world.
Okay, as a doctor with medicine-based knowledge, how was the experience first learning AI-related information?
Difficult. Marcus knows I cannot add or subtract mentally. I have to use my fingers and toes. It doesn't come naturally to me. And I think you'll all be interested to know that my brother is an AI researcher. So definitely it was not genetically passed down to me. But I found it really difficult. But I feel as a doctor, I need to understand not how to write an algorithm, but to understand how the research is read, interpreted, how to discern a good AI paper from a bad AI paper without ever knowing how to write an algorithm. And I can tell you the best clinicians out there working in AI, very few will have true understanding of it. And most of us work with data scientists that have true knowledge of this. But being a translator, I think a lot of clinicians in the AI space are translators from data scientists to the AI clinician to the clinician. And I would say I sit between the AI clinician and the no knowledge clinician. I'm around that spectrum. I'm really not, I don't do a lot of AI research. So a lot of my work is on implementation of digital innovation into practice. So I'm late stage, not early stage AI research.
Actually, I think that's a good point, Don, because I think often people think the whole AI is too scary to, it's too complicated, but, all of us use iPhones without understanding what's really going on inside that little box, so I think AI, if you understand it on a superficial level, it can be very powerful. But as I said before, the key thing is for these approaches is the data, and you are the person who's collecting the data, who's curating the data. So you have an absolutely critical role. So, those people who develop the software and all that, they can do nothing without the data.
Yes, that's true. I think the added point, Marcus, here is that we have to lead the field in understanding. So if someone comes in with Samsung and an iPhone, and and I have no financial disclosures, unfortunately, to either, but you need to understand that what do you use these phones for? Is the glass breakable if you drop it from 10 meters? So you need to understand the field in that. What data was this trained on? Has it been validated? What data sets were it validated on? And were the data sets only on white Caucasian males that were age 25, or does it apply to your population? And the other thing is like buying an OCT machine. What about a maintenance contract? These things, there are drifts. The algorithm doesn't last forever. They will drift, they will change. So as you use the algorithm, who's going to be the maintenance contract that ensures your algorithm is keeping up to date? Who's going to do audits to ensure the accuracies are as it says on the label? So these are things you have to understand. And I think UCL is developing a course on specifically AI for clinicians and what you need to understand. And that's something that I would be keen to do, to be honest. Because I know it in a rudimentary way, but a structured format in learning is key.
Okay, I think that wraps things up for today.
Super. Thank you,
No more
everyone.
questions. Hang on, there's one more question.
Nurses. Oh yeah.
As a nurse with good experience in face-to-face consultant ophthalmology, are there any plans for nurses to contribute to digital ophthalmology implementation?
Well, nurses are already very much part of digital ophthalmology implementation at Morpheus. Morpheus, we have nurse consultants as well that run independent clinics. We have a few nurses that are online that I know of talking here. They're very much integral in our virtual clinics. They utilize the smart clinical history. We have most of our virtual clinics are run by nurses, technicians, and optometrists and ophthalmologists. It's very multidisciplinary. It's not just ophthalmologists.
Okay, thank you, Don. This was great.
Thanks, Marcus.
If you want, you can unmute yourself and join me in the clapping. Thank you, Don.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great.
So thanks for everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you're interested, have a
Thanks,
look at Don's
David.
course. It looks exciting.
Thank you. Thanks, Don.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.